Hello YouTube chess lovers, my friends, this is Gunjan here. Welcome to the 36th episode of Dirty Chess Tricks. In this video, I'm going to continue the second part of my tricky line against Nimzo-Larsen attack, which arises after the following order: b3, e5, bishop to b2, knight to c6, e3, d5, bishop to b5. So white is threatening the move bishop captures e5. So black plays bishop to d6. And white continue with his attacking style f4, pressurizing more on e5, and accordingly black continue with f6. Now in the last episode I have covered the move f captures e5 and the move knight to f3, and we conclude that in most of the case not only black get the advantageous position, but white has to be very careful to avoid lots of tricks and traps. In this episode, we are going to see what happens if white choose the second most popular choice, queen to h5 check. Well, black response is forced. Black has to play g6, and now white idea is to play queen to h4, and thus he can argue that he has weakened this a1 to h8 diagonal, which later on creates some problems in the black camp. Well, yes, indeed, to some extent it's true, but I think after black's next reply, that is e captures f4, it is now white who needs to know a lot of stuff to fight for the equalizer. Now as per the theory, there are two main moves in this position, and let's look each by turn. The first move I want to consider is e captures f4, which looks more natural in this position, but after bishop to d7, not only black get an advantageous position, but white needs to continue with accurate moves to avoid some nasty pitfalls. The good point I like about this position is it doesn't matter whether white continue with any moves. Black planning of campaign is very easy. He wants to play knight to b4, pressurizing the c2 square, and also exchanging the light square bishop, which speed up his development. Now to understand whatever I have said, let's consider the most popular choice by white, that is knight to e2. All other replies has been covered in detail, which are available in the PGN, so kindly check it out. Okay, knight to b4, pressurizing the c2 as well as promoting the exchange. Now instead of knight to b4, there is one important point I like to mention here, that knight to b4 is a very tactical line. So if you don't like that line, then the second alternative here is queen to e7, and a simple line can run like this: castle on the king side, castle on the queen side, rook to e1, and now simple queen to f7. So this is a more strategic setup by black, where you can see I have highlighted by the arrows very effective plan by the black, and because white knight sitting on b1, white attack on black king is very slow. I have attached a model game in the PGN where a 2500 plus GM easily able to crush a 2200 rated opponent, and that game gives you a great idea how to handle such positions. Personally, I like knight to b4 because it's very direct. White response is forced. White has to first capture this bishop, and after queen captures d7, as black is threatening to capture on c2, white has to play knight to a3. Now instead of knight to a3, in one blitz game, my opponent tried the move knight to d4, which doesn't turn out well, because after the move bishop to c5, he thought that he can easily escape from this with the move a3. But what he overlooked is, after bishop captures d4, by force, white is losing a piece and in fact the game. So that's why here knight to a3 is a forced reply. Well, after that, black is going to continue with castle on the queen side, and black's overall aim in this position is to target this loose knight on the a3 square. Here white can decide whether to castle or capture on f6. Capturing on f6 at this point is not a good choice. The simple reason is after knight captures f6, queen captures f6 and the move rook to e8, in the long run white is not able to castle. And to show you how poisonous this position is for white, in the database, one game continued from here, king to f1, black played queen to g4, pressurizing the e2 knight. If rook to e1, then rook to f8 is a very strong reply. So in the game, white played the move knight to d4, which turns out as a big time disaster. Black plays rook to e4, more pressure on f4, so white naturally defended with the move g3, but after rook to f8, white is completely busted. The game finished very quickly, queen to g7, and now the obvious dazzling sacrifice. Boom! White took it, but after queen check, king to e1, queen check, knight to e2, queen check, knight to g1, queen check, king to e2, and after having so many pieces in the lunge, black delivered this wonderful checkmate. So here it is very clear that white cannot even touch that pawn. The more stable choice over here is to castle first and then looking to capture on f6. And surprisingly enough, black is going to allow this with the move h5. What black is arguing is, okay, you can take on f6, but my attack is rolling down on your king side. If white continue with moves such as rook a to e1, then king to b8 is a very strong reply, and I have attached a sample line in the PGN. So the obvious question need to be arise, what happens if white try to recapture his pawn with bishop captures f6? Well, here it turns out that it is more dangerous than last line, because after knight captures f6, queen captures f6 and rook h to e8, just within 14 moves, black obtain a decisive advantage. There are three choices for the white in this position. Neither of them solve any problems in the white camp. The first move I want to consider is rook to f2, which can easily dealt with the move d4. If white take this d4 pawn, then there comes knight to d5 and white is going to lose a piece. So that's not a good idea. What happens if your opponent goes knight to d4? Well, we can continue with the move knight to c6, attacking on a3, and it doesn't matter wherever this knight goes, black obtain a winning edge. If knight to b5, then after bishop to c5, king to h1 and rook to f8, white loses a piece. And instead of knight to b5, if your opponent plays knight to b1, then the easiest is you continue with bishop to c5, and after the forced reply c3, the same tactics, rook to e6, queen to g5 and knight takes d4. White cannot capture that piece. Finally, what happens if your opponent continue with the move knight to c3, which has been played in 2 games. But I'm afraid this is even worse, because after the move rook to e6 attacking the queen, queen to h4 and knight to c6 creates the same problem in the white camp. He cannot go knight to b5. The simple reason is after bishop check, king to h1 and the move a6, white lost a piece. And instead of knight to b5, the interesting part is if he goes to the b1 square, then white has another problem, namely the c2 pawn, and black can exploit this immediately with knight to d4. I have won a very quick game in this line where my 2100 rated opponent continue with the move rook to c1 defending the c2. I continue with bishop to c5. So there is a discover attack on king, so my opponent continue with king to h1, but after rook to e8, you can already see pitiable position of the white camp. There's a threat of either knight to c2 or knight to f5, which white cannot parry, and in the game white decided to clear his back rank with h3. But this is not sufficient, as after knight to f5, this queen has to by force lose the control of the even square. He played queen to g5, but after rook check, rook captures, king to h2, bishop to g1 check, king to h1, and now the nice deflecting move, queen to e7. And it turned out that it doesn't matter whatever white plays, his king is not going to survive long. In the game, due to the time trouble, my opponent take this queen, but then after one move, knight to g3, create a devastating checkmate. So by this analysis, it is very obvious that if white continue with the move e captures f4, then the resulting position is quite superior for the black. Now before making this line, I have gone through various books and videos of GMs, and many of them have recommended the move knight to f3 at this position, completely gambiting a pawn. What they are claiming is after f captures e3 and the move castle, white gets tremendous activity on the black king. Well, I'm afraid it's not that true. And in their analysis, they have mainly considered moves such as king to f7, king to f8, or even pawn captures d2. But they have all missed this critical move, bishop to d7. And I think after this move, there is hardly any compensation for the extra pawn. In the database, 80% of the game continue with the move bishop to d3, and in fact that is the main line. But anyways, if your opponent plays other moves such as knight to c3 or rook to e1, then I have covered those lines in detail which are available in the PGN. To give you a brief idea how good these lines are for black, if your opponent continue with knight to c3, attacking on d5, then black can simply play knight to e7. White doesn't have time to go back because then the second pawn hangs. So by force, white has to capture this bishop, and after queen takes, he has to regain on e3. But then comes bishop to c5. And then you can see by the arrows the simple but very effective plan of campaign by black. And in all these variations, do not forget black is a clear pawn up. So that means white has to play energetically to compensate for his extra pawn. And accordingly, bishop to d3 is a main line because here white is threatening the move bishop captures g3, and black needs to know what he is going to do about it. Well, after a lot of research, I come to conclusion that after the move e2, in almost all the variation, black obtain a slight advantage, and in fact, over the board, it's not easy to play as a white. There are mainly 4 options available for the white, and let's look at each by turn. The first, obviously, we need to know if bishop captures g6 is working in this position, and the answer is nope, because after pawn captures g6, queen captures h8, black has this move, pawn captures rook with a queen, and after queen takes, and the move bishop to e6, after the all complications, black emerge with an extra piece. The second move, rook to f2, we can straight away dismiss because after the move bishop to c5, white has a huge problem, and even in this case, bishop captures g6 doesn't work well for the white. The third move I want to consider is bishop captures e2, but if that bishop has to go back, then doesn't black position get better? Well, answer is yes, of course. A simple line which gives black comfortable advantage goes like this: queen to e7. White has tried two options, but neither of them working very good. If knight to c3, then the simplest is you castle on the queen side, which at first sight look very strange because white can capture on d5 attacking 2 spot. But tactically this is working for black, as after queen captures e2, knight captures f6, so there is a discover x-ray going on the h8 rook. But once again, after knight captures f6, bishop captures f6, and the wonderful saving resource bishop to e7, everything is in control for the black. The most critical response here is rook a to e1, but after bishop captures f6, queen captures f6, and the move queen to b5, black emerged with an extra piece. The second move, rook to e1, looks more threatening, but once again after castle, white doesn't have a single threat in this position. One of my game against a national master continue from here, bishop to c4. So my opponent attacking on d5, I simply play queen to f7, defending all the threat. So my opponent forcefully moved the bishop once again with bishop to b5. Okay, bishop to c5 check. If he played d4, then after bishop to d6, black clearly emerged with an extra pawn, and the pressure of the long diagonal has completely gone. So accordingly, my opponent plays king to h1, but there comes g5, hitting the queen, queen to g3, and now knight g to e7. So black has a simple threat of knight to f5. My opponent played bishop to d3, but you can easily see that after the move h5, whose position is better, and in fact black has an extra pawn. Considering all the options so far, I think rook to e1 is the most accurate choice by the white, and against this you have two good choices. Knight to e5 gives a very solid and equal position, and if you are playing against a high rank opponent, you should certainly consider this option. But more dynamic is king to f7, and after this, once again, black has a very clear-cut plan in the position. It doesn't matter whether your opponent plays any highlighted moves, knight b4 is the next obvious choice by the black. Here the rook captures e2 is the most popular choice. However, if your opponent plays, let's say, knight to c3, then after knight to b4, attacking the bishop, and bishop cannot move anywhere as the c2 pawn drops. So the forced reply is rook captures e2, and after that, knight captures bishop, pawn captures, and the move c6. Not only black has a solid position with extra pawn advantage, but white has some shattered pawn on the center, and this position is quite good for the black. So let's check out what happens if your opponent plays rook captures e2. Our plan doesn't change. We are going to continue with knight to b4, attacking the bishop. And this is what I like about this move. This bishop doesn't have any good square, and once you take this bishop, all the pressure of the white is completely diffuse. Now to understand the future plans and ideas, I like to show you a game between two GM where white continue with the move knight to a3, black continue with the obvious move knight captures d3, pawn captures d3, and now king to g7. So you can see I have highlighted by the arrows a very simple plan by black, that is he wants to play c6, consolidate his extra pawn, and then he wants to play knight to h6, knight to f5, hitting the queen and asking white, where does your compensation lies? Don't forget, white has this horrible double pawn which is always a headache in the endgame. Let's see this plan live in action. Rook a to e1 happens, knight to h6, knight to d4, white is coming on e6, but black doesn't bother about it. He continues with the move rook to f8. Knight to e6 check happen, black response is force, bishop takes, rook takes, and at first sight it looks like white has created some pressure on f6, But it is just an illusion, as after bishop check, king to h1 and the move knight to f5, by force white has to move the queen. Queen to f4 happens, and now the obvious move h5, stopping any g4 idea by white. White continue with the move knight to b5, so eyeing at the d4 square, and black consolidate his position with the move c6. Knight to d4 happen, and we have the few exchanges, that is bishop captures d4, bishop captures d4, knight captures d4, queen captures d4, and now rook to f7. And I think we should stop over here. You can check out rest of the game in the PGN, but one can easily see that for a sacrifice pawn, white never get an attack, and in the resulting position, not only black emerge with an extra pawn, but white has some horrible pawns on the center of the board. And this major piece endgame, if anybody is playing for the win, it is only black. Well, I hope with this brief analysis, now you literally pray that your opponent plays the Nimzo-Larsen attack, so you can throw this surprising weapon and get the full point. Due to the time constraint, I cannot able to show every single line in this video, so kindly check out the PGN where I have covered most of the line in the detail. Thank you for watching this video. Feel free to like, subscribe and comment on this video, and I'll meet you in my next episode very soon. Bye and take care.